Okay, we're live.
All right, we're reconvening our afternoon meeting and shifting gears to H230 with our legislative council.
Good afternoon, this is Mike O'Grady, Legislative Council. Hopefully you have in front of you draft 3.4 with the April 22nd date and a 12:19 p.m. timestamp. Do you want me to walk through changes or the first changes on page 3? Line 17, this was editor suggested change. They suggested that it say as used in this section, they gain violation means. And that's fine with me. Next change is page 6. These are the major changes that you're going to see in H230. There's 2 different color coding, highlighting. The yellow reflects the changes that you requested last week when the committee looked over the bill. The gray reflects changes that I made after a question came up this morning. And the question was, does the language as it was drafted last week prohibit someone who's building a house from taking a reptile or amphibian? And it did, because the definition of taking is very broad. It includes killing, harassing, chasing, harrowing, and it wasn't limited, it wasn't conditioned. So I was asked to go and try and write something. I had an hour. And so what I did is I created these tiers, and I may have done too much. And so I created a provision that says no person shall take by hunting a wild reptile or amphibian in the state unless authorized under the rules by the commissioner. Then I said no person shall import a reptile or an amphibian into the state unless authorized under the rules of the commissioner. And I said no person shall remove a wild reptile or amphibian in the state from the wild for the purpose of possession, commercial harvest, export, or sale unless authorized by the rules of the commissioner. And I'm not sure that that was the intent of the department. It does create this situation where between now or whenever this prohibition would go into effect and the rules, that there would be no ability to take them, no ability to import them, no ability to possess. And the department already has authority to allow wild animals to be imported. So you would be stopping that authority for reptiles and amphibians. And I don't know if that's what you wanted. And you can see that existing language. It's on page 9, where the department has the authority. It says a person shall not bring into, transport within, transport through, or possess in the state any live, wild bird, or animal, including reptiles or amphibians. So what are we doing with this language? And it's like, what did I do to this language is really the question. And I think after talking with Hannah, the general counsel for Fish and Wildlife, I think what the department would prefer is to scale this back to be about commercial import, export, or taking or possession for the purposes of sale. So it's not about hunting. You wouldn't necessarily need to establish limits, taking limits or seasons. It would be giving the commissioner discretion. The commissioner may authorize the import, export, etc. of reptiles or amphibians for commercial purposes. May establish requirements or conditions on the import, export, use, possession for commercial. So it would be much more limited and fewer unintended consequences, which the language that I drafted this morning may have.
I guess I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Hannah. But that just makes me think about, one of the concerns that came up for us was that right now, I mean, is what you just proposed, would that cover just using a turtle for target practice, which is currently legal? That we found, I think you.
No, it would not address that.
So that's how we got into this conversation about changing the language that was originally proposed to us. Is a concern that what, kind of like, what the heck, that's a turtle that belongs to all of us. Why should someone have the right to just plug it and not even have a use for it? That's our concern.
Sure. And this is Hannah Smith with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I hear that concern. That kind of behavior was not explicitly what the department intended to address with our original language. The concern from the Wildlife Diversity Program was primarily around regulating import of species that are brought in as pets and then have the potential to negatively impact native populations. So that was sort of the primary concern when language was proposed. We had drafted the rulemaking authority broadly to cover, conservation and protection and taking of reptiles and amphibians, of those things. Because, as you stated, Madam Chair, currently there are no limits on taking reptiles and amphibians in the state unless they're listed as threatened and endangered. So short term, the objective was to create rulemaking authority so that we could appropriately adopt protection and limitation on species that were being moved in and out of the state and had the potential to impact native populations, with the possibility of also closing seasons for certain reptiles and amphibians as the department felt that was necessary to protect populations.
But wouldn't you have to open a season first?
Well, they're open. I mean, currently.
Right
there are
now.
no limits on the taking of these.
Right.
But our intention was not to ban the taking across the board. It was to have the rulemaking authority to conserve and protect those populations that were under threat for some reason. And it could be any number of threats.
That got us to a conversation about what is a common species and how do you determine that? And when we know all species, but in particular reptiles and amphibians, are in pretty dramatic decline, half of ours are threatened. That's where we ended up thinking, why not come at this from the other direction? And then only allow the taking of those species that were determined to truly be common, and where there was an interest, although we are also stumbling, I think, over learning more about the life history of the snapping turtle. It's like, yes, it may be that it's used by a few people, but we're not even sure that's advisable given what we've learned.
Well, I think that way the language, our wildlife diversity program was heavily involved in the drafting of the original language. And they felt that with the rulemaking authority, it addressed their immediate concerns, and it also gave them the flexibility to essentially prohibit taking when species became, when there was some threat to them that required that additional protection. And I guess that I would defer to the way that it was drafted originally as providing the protection the program and the staff scientists found necessary to address threats that are currently existing on the landscape. And I think it's difficult to evaluate, to put into statute which species necessitate protection because, climate change is affecting habitat on an annual basis, and the movement of species across New England and the country is changing dramatically as climate changes.
Representative Sackley.
I mean, I would argue that that's exactly why we should be protecting them in the way that we've proposed in the changes that we've been just talking about.
Right.
I know that the biologists didn't think a ban on all taking was necessary when the rule was when the language was proposed, but no, that's this committee's prerogative.
Representative Bartholomew.
On page 6, where you have all this gray text, there's, on section 6, there's a 1 and a 3, then no person shall. What was there before?
Um,
I'm looking at.
hold on a second.
This is the language.
Said no person shall take, possess, or import a reptile or amphibian in the state unless authorized under the rules adopted by the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife under subsections B or C. So why that was something of an issue and why I separated them out is the question of take. Because take is often used as a synonym for hunt, but it is actually much more than just hunting. And so the question I received this morning was, if I'm building the house and I kill the frog, is that an illegal taking? And technically, yes. I was asked to try to address that. And so take by hunting would be prohibited unless authorized. But then import is already something that's regulated under 4709. So that could probably go away. But then there is the question of removal for purposes of possession, commercial harvest, export, or sale. And that, again, I had an hour to do this, so I did my best.
If you're building a house, why can't you just pick up the frog and move it out of the way? You don't have to kill it, do you?
So I used to landscape, and we would be landscaping, and the next thing you know, a snake would fly out from whatever equipment we were using. And that's technically a take.
Hmm.
And like, do you want to prohibit that? That is not, I believe, your intent.
What happens if that happens to you, but it's a endangered species?
Well, the endangered species taking is usually has an intent requirement. I mean, if you run into a catamount in Vermont, that technically would be a listed species, and you're not going to be charged for that. Because it wasn't intentional.
We can't have the same intent here when you hit a frog with a lawnmower.
I think you could.
Representative Austin.
There was the same question.
Oh, great.
Mark on that.
Other questions? This is a very low energy day. I've never seen our committee so quiet. Representative Tagliavia.
I like the idea of deferring to the biologists and the people who are out in the field looking to see if they find population decreases or something like that, rather than having this in statute. So like it's been said before, if they need to react, they can react faster than having to wait for the legislature to act.
Right, and one of our lead biologists in the state came asking us to not have any legal takings. So that's how we got into this conversation.
Yeah.
do you want to just leave take out of it for the time being? Do you want to just say that the commissioner may adopt rules regarding the commercial import, export, or possession and sale of reptiles or amphibians? And that's not about taking, it's just about the commercial trade in the animals.
I'm interested in a simpler solution to our problem. That perhaps is too simple for me because of what I said. I mean, I just think that it's unconscionable to use a turtle as target practice. And I would like to address that. And if they're not covered under wanton waste because they don't have a regulated season, then we need a way of covering them.
Need what?
We need a way of including them in wanton waste. Like they just shouldn't be hanging out there.
I think that that's likely covered under the animal cruelty statute. I can confirm that. But
I don't think it is under the board rule 1.1. If you have a hunting license, you can take any wildlife,
there's a carve out for anything
anything what?
regulated by the board.
Unless regulated by, like, in accordance with the board rules. And so that's why you can shoot red squirrel. And you just need a hunting license.
So my request would be that yes, we could go more simple, go back to something simpler, but we need to address the issues of that. And even, I mean, I think I mentioned, but like, I think there's a lack of awareness that I mean, the reality is we don't know how many of these animals are no longer common. I think there's it's not a lot of data. And so just to allow anyone to take an animal, even take it home without killing it, just seems wrong in this current environment. So I would like those addressed for the next round. And since I think we're finished with this for now, and we can move on to 86. Representative Moore.
What was it that was preventing us from just using that S5 designation as opposed to identifying specific species? That gives the
yeah, I don't-
biologist the right to say it's by rule, it's these and not those. Be worried about.
Well, I think that is what the original common species,
Right.
I guess.
That is common species. I don't, whether that's an actual term or not. S5 seemed to be not entirely, right, that seemed to be the official designation.
We're gonna ban ice cream in the building. Representative Bartholomew.
Did you say there are all these by huntings added? Did you say is hunting defined?
No, it's not, but, well, there isn't a definition of it, but you can only hunt with a valid hunting license. So you can only take those animals that are authorized for taking under a valid hunting license. It is something like what Representative Pritchard was talking about with the endorsement. When you get your license, depending on what license it has an endorsement that says what you can take. So it would, and there's a section later on in the bill that requires when the commissioner issues a permit for license to take reptiles and amphibians, or issues one that would allow it, it has to have the endorsement for reptiles and amphibians. So that's, the hunting isn't defined, neither is fishing, but it's authorized by having a valid license for either of those activities.
Representative Sakowicz.
So I'm walking in the woods and I turn over a log and I see a really cute amphibian. And I think I want to take this home. I don't have a hunting license. that is a take, and that would be illegal because I don't have a hunting license.
Right now, if you didn't have a hunting license, yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. That would be prohibited.
If I did have a hunting
You
license.
did have a hunting license.
And hunting license, just a general license to hunt in Vermont. I could.
You could take wildlife with underneath that, yes. I mean, I'll read to you 1:1 again.
Seems really.
It is very broad. Wild animals other than protected birds or game or fur-bearing animals may be taken at any time by any lawful means by any person holding a valid license for such taking or by any person permitted by law to take game without a license. You can take wildlife, you can take wild animals.
Is there a particular kind of hunting license that I would need to do this, or is it more general?
Well, then you have to go to the licenses and see what they're authorized to do underneath each license. And generally, I would think this would be a hunting license, a combo license, and a super sport license that would allow for that. And a lifetime license too.
It has to be a hunting license, not a fishing license. Even if it's a frog.
Yes, because they're wild animals. And so a hunting license shall entitle the holder to take wild animals other than fish, except by trapping. And except for those species that require a separate big game license. And then going down to combo license shall entitle the holder to take fish and wild animals except by trapping. And then a lifetime or super sport, take wild animals as allowed under a combo license. And maybe a youth hunting license or youth combo license as well. That would be, you would need to have one of those licenses in order to take reptiles, amphibians legally under Board Rule 1:1.
What other creatures besides wild, like reptiles and amphibians are considered wild animals?
Because under the definition of wild animal or wildlife in 10 VSA 4002, 4001. Let's have trouble finding this. Hold on a second. It's all animals, including birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles, other than domestic animals, domestic fowl, or domestic pets.
Not mollusks, not fish, not insects.
Well, those are animals. Then if you want to go to fish, I think the definition of fish is in the rule. Yeah. I'm gonna have to find the definition of fish. I'm not finding it right now.
For example, insects wouldn't be considered wild animals underneath hunting laws.
I don't think the issue of insect taking has been really vetted in Vermont. And I know that there have been people that do collect them. Worms, for example, crickets. but I don't know of any regulation over that.
All right. I think we need to do a little offline thinking on this one. And so we're gonna shift gears to H86 and hear where we are with that.
Okay. So for H86, draft number 5.2 with the 4/22 date and 8:04 AM timestamp. Everybody have that? Okay. So do you want me to just walk through changes or, yep. So first change is that the Judiciary Committee talked about how to make the BMPs, the standards, more transparent, how to have more participation in their adoption. And as I believe I discussed with you already, they require that those BMPs be adopted by rule. And what they discussed in rulemaking, what are the standards before LCAR for LCAR to object to a rule? And one of those standards is it's against the rule, proposed rule is against legislative intent. And consequently, the Judiciary Committee wanted a statement about what these BMPs and what this bill is for. So first, they wanted a purpose. What is the purpose of the bill? And the purpose is largely language that you had drafted related to the establishment of the program. That it is the purpose of this act to establish the accepted standards of care for the application of salt and salt alternatives in an effective and efficient manner that provides safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles on traveled surfaces, while also reducing the impacts of salt and salt alternatives on the quality of waters of the state. You will see that language almost exactly, if not exactly, went for the language to establish the program by ANR. But then there's this intent language. It is in the intent of this act that a person's compliance with the standards of care required under this act shall limit the person's liability in negligence lawsuits. So when they are complying with the BMPs, when they are implementing them, that is the intent of this act to protect those applicators from negligence. And so when the BMPs are proposed in rule and come before LCAR, that will be the measure of what legislative intent is for the purposes of protection from negligence. So then moving on from there, the next change is on page 6. There had previously been a discussion in the Judiciary Committee of having the rules adopted by July of 2026, and then having the liability protection go into effect in January of 2027. And that discussion led to the conclusion that you don't need a date for when the liability protection goes into place, because once the program's up and commercial salt applicators start voluntarily entering the training, once they're certified, they get the liability protection. So you don't need a date. It's like whenever ANR stands up this program and people start getting trained. So on page 6, line 11, that reference to the date was struck at the beginning of 1353 subsection A. Moving on then, the next page on line 1, this was just a conformity in the use of terms. Previously, instead of saying limitation on liability, it said protection from liability. One of the advocates said you should use consistent terms, and he was correct. And previously, there was a subsection that said all certified applicators are presumed to be acting pursuant to the BMPs for application. And that's superfluous. If they're have to comply with the BMPs to get the liability protection, then you don't need a presumption that they have to comply. And so that was struck. And then the last change is on page 10. This is in the municipal salt applicators and the liability protection that they receive once they complete the Vermont local roads curriculum annually. There had been no requirement that they maintain records of their salt application. You might recall the commercial salt applicators have to maintain records of their application in order to maintain their limitation on liability. Judiciary wanted that same requirement for the municipal applicator. So the municipality has to keep a record describing its winter road, parking lot, and property maintenance practices consistent with the requirements of the Vermont Local Roads Program. The record shall include the type and rate of application of de-icing, materials, the dates of treatment, and the weather conditions for each event requiring de-icing. The record shall be retained by the municipality for a period of 3 years, just as they are required to be kept by the commercial salt applicator. And the only other changes are redesignating the section numbers because the addition of section 1.
And did the Judiciary Committee have time to consider this?
They considered it, and they decided that they will not have a straw vote yet until they see if you change anything in this version.
Oh, all right. Representative Austin.
Yeah, just where it says the record shall include type and rate. So if someone's applying salt, at a higher elevation and they come, do they have to go? Is it just a general reporting, or do they have to be specific about everywhere they go?
Don't really know that yet because the BMPs haven't been established and the BMPs will have requirements for record keeping. And that's partly the conversation that Judiciary had. They were asking specifics, and my response is, I don't know, because that's what the BMPs will address. And that's why you made it part of rulemaking and part of the transparent process.
Representative Bartholomew.
I'm confused about the versions that have come back and forth between judiciary because we got a version that had removed limited liability. So now it's back. And so is this the version that we sent them before and they reconsidered it? Or is this a redrafting of what they sent us the last time?
It's a redraft of what they sent you the last time.
But that didn't have limited liability in it, right?
Yeah, they reconsidered.
So I'm just confused about, we spent a lot of time before we sent it to them and then they took it out and now it's back.
This is what's back. What's in front of you.
We're talking page 6. Am I just being dense here?
Well, I'm sorry. Do you have a?
So they have not voted on anything. Their committee has not voted on anything. This is what they are proposing to you. They've talked today about what their role is, and they concluded that their role is on whether and how the limited liability protection would apply. And this is what they're proposing for the purposes of the limited liability.
So we sent them a proposed bill to look at. They gave us proposal A and we didn't like it. So then they're giving us proposal B. Is that where we are? Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Thanks.
There was another hand.
Uh,
Representative Tagliavini.
We're talking about chloride application for de-icing and safety and stuff like that. What about chloride application for dust control and safety? We haven't talked about that at all.
Did talk about it, but I'm glad you brought it up because it was in one of our versions.
Because that could be just as
Is it
a
addressed?
safety issue on some roads, depending on
Yeah.
how busy they are. I mean, I've driven behind cars or on roads where there's enough dust kicked up so you can't see a car coming the other way.
Right.
So right on.
Right. So we did talk about it and thank you for bringing it up. What Is that part of the language that we did add it in, Michael, and is it still in this version?
So if you look at the purpose language and the creation of the program, it doesn't say de-icing. It says while reducing the manner that provides safe conditions for pedestrians and motor vehicles on travel surfaces while also reducing the impacts. It's not de-icing there. It's not winter maintenance. It's safe conditions. And then you have in the best management practices, again, it's the application for safe conditions, when they can be used. So it's not simply focused on de-icing. Now, the liability protection is focused on hazards from snow or ice and the potential liability that may arise if you're implementing the BMPs and there is a hazard. But the program as a whole is not just about de-icing or winter maintenance.
It too covers dust control several times and so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Where's the dust control on page 2?
line 11, line 1, and then also line 11.
That's what it. Other questions? Representative Labor.
Since we're looking at liability, any of the liability issues addressing sand, especially in the spring on curves and corners for motorcycles.
So the BMPs will establish standards for when sand is an appropriate alternative to salt or salt alternatives for de-icing or dust control, and that's on page 4, lines 6 through 8. So if there's that BMP for use of sand, or it's in another BMP, then and the applicator is putting down sand, they're applying according to the BMP that they should receive the liability protection.
You look inquisitive. Oh, okay.
You were looking inquisitive.
Oh, well, I guess but Representative Labor, I mean, your point. I
My
think
point is,
is
on
that-
motorcycles, they're not coming down the road.
No, I know your point, and I'm saying right now, town can spread sand, and do they have an obligation to remove it, or do they have liability related to it now?
Whether they have an obligation to remove it really depends on how big of a town they are. They're an MS4 town, they have an obligation to do street sweeping. Most towns are not MS4 towns. So whether or not a town does street sweeping is really up to their practices. What's in their highway budget. There's no requirement that municipalities remove sand from roads.
Right. Representative Chapin.
Just on the summer versus winter piece, in that section where you added under municipal record keeping, you used the word winter road. And maybe that's should be not winter. I'm trying to find the other liability section and find the equivalent record keeping.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And yeah, the same change to me needs to be made.
Yeah.
Page 7, line 15.
Okay, further questions? Representative Tagliavia.
With regard to fiscal note, cost, fiscal notes are only based on cost to the state, not the municipality or anyone else that's going to be affected by this. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yep.
So we're not concerning ourselves with the cost, the additional cost to municipalities for record keeping and extra man hours and stuff like that.
Well, it's still voluntary, right?
Well, the municipal program, not necessarily, because it's as part of the Vermont Local Roads Crew.
Voluntary, local roads program is voluntary.
Okay. And I'm gonna write that in.
Right, further thoughts on H86? Couple of minor changes, and then I think we're moving toward a vote here. We warn it for tomorrow. All right. I think we might reschedule you for the CAFO conversation when we have a little more energy. That would be the next thing we would do today, but I'm not thinking that we're operating at our best right now. So maybe we'll find time with you on Thursday morning.
So just my takeaways. I'm gonna make the changes to 86. I'm gonna remove all the highlighting in case you want to take a vote on it at some point.
Scheduled to vote on it tomorrow afternoon.
For 2:30, I don't really know what you want me to do yet. So
Yeah, me too. Do you want to work on H230 with Michael O'Grady?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. I guess that's planned for 2:30. Are there any other thoughts before we adjourn for the day? Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding 2:30, and I understand your consideration for the shooting of a turtle. But I'm wondering, does that get into the taking of a turtle by other means that it's used for making soup? I know of people that use snapping turtles to make soup.
Yeah, and unfortunately you missed the testimony we took
I
on
did.
the ill-advised of that. That's part of how we got into this conversation, and that's part of why you'll see in one of the drafts that we had 3 species identified for rulemaking for taking them, and snapping turtle was one. You are welcome to work with Representative Statkowitz and Legislative Council on this.
Yeah, and then my second question is, how much of a problem is shooting turtles? Do we know? Do we have any idea? Was that discussed?
In as much as like the biologists who testified had, the carapaces of turtles that were shot, for sure. So the thing we don't know is like the universe of take. We had a lot of conversation last week. Representative Pritchard had suggestions for how to put a additional tag on the license to help us understand how many people we're actually taking, which I think we're still doing, right? Or we don't have to do, but the commissioner can do it now anyway.
the language requires an endorsement on your license.
Yeah, so we can keep that. Representative Austin.
Yeah, just So it seems like the chloride bill is to alleviate a problem of TMDL on water.
Mm.
And so is there a way that we'll be measuring this? Like if a lot of people volunteer and I'm sure someone's measuring.
You're measuring it every year, all
Yeah.
the time. That's how we know there's a problem.
But will we know if this works to lessen it?
I guess if we see improvement after we implement them.
Okay.
All right, we're adjourned for the afternoon.